All right, Andrew, you work with some really high net worth individuals who have net worths of, tens of millions of dollars in some situations, and you work very closely with them and their families. The question that I have for you is this. Most of these people that you were working with did not inherit their wealth. They've started their own businesses, they've been successful in careers, they've climbed their way up the corporate ladder, however they ended up getting it. What is one of the biggest revelations that they either have when they're working with you or that, they have shared as they are building financial wealth along their journey?
I think it's very easily two things. It's eventually they realize that more money does not mean that all the problems go away. So money doesn't solve all the issues or problems. And they eventually figure out that they're chasing the wrong stuff. And what I mean by that simply is they're chasing stuff only to realize that once they capture all the stuff, that doesn't fill the gaping void or the hole. It doesn't validate them. And then number two, they basically then get lost trying to figure out like, okay, well, somebody like they didn't move my cheese. The cheese is gone. Like am I even a mouse and am I looking for cheese or am I hamster? Like, I don't even know who I am in this process. And that is especially for my clients who are founders and entrepreneurs. It's the most lonely place. Yeah, it's just, it's heavy, man. It's heavy. It's lonely. It's isolating. And I can't think of any other word than it's kind of like a self-indulged or created hell to speak of.
It makes me think of so many times you'll hear athletes that, once they get the championship, they won the World Cup or the Super Bowl, whatever the case is, and then they'll talk about that experience, shortly thereafter and be like, yeah, the weeks that followed that, sometimes the months that followed that were some of the most miserable of my life because they reached the peak, everything they had been striving for since their childhood and all the hours of training and everything they had put into it was to achieve this goal. And then when they finally get it, it's like, well, what else is there? Just doing it again, kind of a thing. And I've just always found that very interesting. And I think there's something similar to be said, in the mindset of founders and entrepreneurs. I spoke with one just recently who's doing very well for himself. He has essentially replaced himself in his business. He's making millions of dollars a year. Company's doing great. He works about 2 hours a day. And he's, according to him, that's him looking for things to do. And he's like, I don't know what to do with myself now. And he's stuck. So it's interesting that this continues to be a theme of people who are, founders, entrepreneurs, high performing, whatever the case may be. What is that? What do they end up coming up with, or in what kind of conversations, with you're having with them? Is there anything that they're like, maybe I wouldn't be in this position if along the journey I would have done this differently? Or what kind of nuggets of wisdom to prevent that from happening for people who are trying to grow their wealth quickly, have you heard?
Well, believe it or not, I think that the answer to that question has nothing to do with wealth. There's a great book by Keith Cunningham, called The Road to Less Stupid.
I like the title already.
It's a great book. Keith is a former CFO and did some fractional CFO work. And one of the things that Cunningham talks about in the book is, are you solving the problem that isn't? Meaning you're addressing the symptom versus you've created the space and time to objectively and thoughtfully identify what's the problem. Because if we're solving the symptom, then we're solving the problem effectively that isn't. And I can't think of a better way to kind of sum up the wealth game that so many folks like. the problem that we think we have is we need to eclipse, or we need to get to a certain point. But I mean, I've met people, Stephen, that here's an easy example. I'll give you the long story short version. Was playing golf a while back with couple folks. I knew one person in the group. The other two basically came along, and during the course of the game, I learned that one of the guys in the group had just sold or exited a business for $160 million. Now, given that we run a family office for founders, you would think, oh, honeypot, man, like, wow, here's a client right here. And I think one of the things that makes me a little bit different or unique, and not from an ego perspective, is like that was actually not whatever even entered my mind. What I was fascinated by is I wanted to learn from him. And so I just said, hey, that's incredible. That seems like what most every person's trying to do. If you could do it all over again, would you do it? And he didn't even pause. He said, absolutely not. And I was like, whoa, wait, what do you mean? $160 million? Like, what do you mean absolutely not?
Yeah.
And I said, so you mean you wouldn't have started the company? You wouldn't have sold it? You would have done it differently? What? He goes, I had an opportunity to sell the company at $60 million. I turned it down because I wanted more. Okay. I've since realized after pressure from my wife, I didn't even know what more was. So there was,
I love that.
So I said, okay, so what would you do different? He said, I would have sold it at $60 million because I have huge regrets on the things that I missed out that $100 million can't even begin to buy. So right. It's that concept that we hear, even for folks maybe listening in corporate America that want out, that you work with a lot of times, Stephen, that, you're running the corporate ladder, you're beholden to everybody else, and one of two things happens, right? You get blindsided in the layoff, and it's like, whoa, my whole identity was here, putting it in for the company, and now you're just going to cut me loose like that?
Right.
Or it's like you arrive and you get up there and you're the man or you're the woman, and you're like, wait, is this it? Like, because I'm at the top of the ladder and I don't like the view. Like, it's almost like I put my ladder on the wrong thing or the wrong wall, if you will. Right. And so I'd say the solve is, it's actually three very simple things.
Okay.
It's purpose, it's community, and it's service.
Okay. I like that. Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Most people who pay anything attention to technology and stocks right now know Jensen from NVIDIA. And where I live in Gainesville, we're big NVIDIA fans because his co-founder actually was a Florida Gator and has given a lot of money to the university and some of the new programs and was crucial in developing one of the supercomputers we now have there. And recently he was in an interview, and they asked him that pretty much the same question. If you had to start it all over again, and he's still relatively young, right? He's one of the richest men in the world now. I think he's in his 50s, or maybe just touching 60, maybe. And they were like, if you knew what you were going to go through and how to do it all over again, would you? And he's like, definitely not. Almost the exact same response. He just said, no, if I knew what it was going to take and I saw that in advance, he's like, there's no way I would have done this. And I think that's fascinating, that this isn't new information. We've heard this before over and over and over again. But I think for the people that are on their way up, you can't hear this enough because you think, well, I'll be different. I'll be the exception. I'll be the one that balances, doing the job and finding the purpose and, the community and all the things you just said. And yet we just don't. And I think a lot of that personally is indicative because of what society puts as its primary value on, which is financial wealth, right? That's what society says, we need to be able to do. So it takes a lot of deprogramming to not think that way. And one of the things that you said, then this is something I talk about, to some of my clients a lot. You said he didn't even know what more was. what I like to tell people is go, what number is enough? You know, so it kind of plays into that a lot, right? It's like, when will you have enough money to where you will stop chasing it? And it's not a thought that crosses our mind. You know, I joke with people. I'm like, we're not squirrels. Squirrels, they know how many nuts they got to bury and put inside trees for the winter. You know what I mean?
Unfortunately, they can't figure out sometimes whether to get out of the road or not.
They can't. Because they're too busy chasing the nuts.
I told my boys one time, I said, hey, you see that squirrel in the road? And he's like, yeah. I said, you know what that squirrel's problem was? He goes, no. I said, well, it's one of two things. It was paralysis by analysis, or
Yeah.
it was a lack of taking action, right? Like,
it's true.
One of those two, because he probably could have gone right or he could have gone left, but he waited just a little bit too long.
Just a little too long. No, I agree with you. So yeah, it's a really interesting notion that, you know, and I talk about, I agree with you. I have something that a kind of a philosophy that I talk about that's called true wealth. And true wealth is the balance of the four types of wealth. And it kind of mirrors what you were saying. You know, it's like what a lot of these founders are really chasing is financial wealth. But the three other types of wealth are social wealth, time wealth, and health wealth. And that really goes in line with what you were saying around the community and the purpose and, you know, missing out on all of that. Because, you know, money's great, you know, but it doesn't fix all your problems, not even close. So I love the fact that our philosophy is really kind of aligned there, you know, on that. What do you find, you know, so you have a family office, you do concierge work with a lot of these people. So you're handling not just money, but also a lot of the minutia of these people's, you know, their daily lives. One of the things that I really hammer on about is time wealth, because it's one of the ones that we take for granted the most, and yet at the same time have no idea how much of it we have left. So one of the things I'm always telling people is you do not have time. I think it's one of the biggest lies in society, especially for people in their 20s and 30s nowadays. I just saw a stat that, you know, people in their 30s, marriage, buying a home, getting out of debt, and there was one other significant milestone in life, they're all down amongst people in their 30s. So it's like, what are you truly accomplishing? And I know more and more people that are getting into their mid and late 30s that haven't done any of those major milestones, and they're kind of losing that purpose. They're kind of losing the what am I here for? And they're running into these identity challenges. So what would you say, what advice, you know, from seeing that on the other side, being the person who is alleviating a lot of these useless things to give time wealth back to people like that? I think that's something anybody could learn from. What are some of the things that you're like, hey, this is low hanging fruit. I can, you know, free up a lot of time for these people by doing this.
Well, look, I'm a visual learner, auditory second. You know, there's three types of learners: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, right? And so I wouldn't call him a friend. He's an acquaintance, but I love his work. Bob Goff has written some exceptional books. I can't recommend Undistracted more.
Oh, I'll have to check that out. I'm a big distraction guy.
I'm doing it with a men's accountability group, and it's a really simple concept. It's, you're not losing because you're missing out on all the stuff. You're losing because you're worried about missing out on all the stuff, and you're not undistracted and focused on what your purpose is. But the reason I want to mention that is I was at a YEO event in Atlanta back in February, and Bob's just so good at making things like I call it landing the plane, like making it real. And so he had this long, flexible tape measure, you know, kind of like the ones that your mom measured when, well, I don't know. My mom made a couple of Halloween costumes for me. It's the reason I go by Andrew and not Andy, because she dressed me up as Raggedy Andy with one of her friends,
Nice.
Raggedy Ann. But so another story for another time. But one of those flexible tape measures, it was really, really long. I think it had 100 inches on it.
Okay.
And he said, you know, how long do you think you're going to live? he asked a couple folks and he said, I'm just hoping to get to 85. So he went down and he clipped off 15 inches and he goes, okay, well, there's 15. He just kind of threw it out in the audience, right? Then he went through, he goes, so I'm ever how many years old, right? Shows the ADHD showing up there. I was not catching the details, but he cuts that off, right? And so he went from this tape measure that was 100 inches long, and he's down inside 25 inches.
Okay.
Right? He's like, and so, you think you've got forever, but you don't. And you need a perspective check. Mm-hmm. And he used that to say, and you think someday I'm going to do something big. Why wait? Take the risk.
I love that.
Do it today. You have greatness inside of you. So, I think there's perspective that we need. Number one.
Okay.
Second thing I would share, if you haven't ever listened to it, The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale, that anybody can go get on Spotify or whatever. It's like 32 minutes. And I was listening to it again about 2 weeks ago. And the thing that really stood out to me that I think ties in here, Stephen, is he basically says the things that matter and are worth the most in life, like they make life rich and they give joy and happiness, they're free. It's people.
They are.
It's relationships.
Mm-hmm.
It's serving other people, right? It's experiences with people. It has nothing to do with all the things that you're chasing, right?
Right.
So I think there's that aspect, but I would draw it back to purpose. And, because I've run a college planning practice where we ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? Which I would contend is, it's the stupidest question, because when you understand that, the average male or female, doesn't have the brain development and capacity to make an affirmative decision like that until probably 24 at the earliest.
Right.
And we're sending our sons and daughters, if an appropriate fit, to college at 17, 18. And we've got high schools in what I call this race to nowhere of like, take 45 AP classes and dual enroll and go out early. And so we're actually unintentionally exacerbating it, right?
And by the way, when you get to college, there's no more figure out what you want to do and be undecided. You have to declare a major right off the bat, as if you know what you want at 18 years old.
And then you get colleges who tell you, oh, don't worry, we're good at that. That's Spanish, by the way, for we're fine for you to hang out 7 years to life, because every year we do, we profit, right? So it's through that piece that we have to understand, with the younger age, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. We're going at it the wrong way. Figure out, although this isn't sexy, help your kid figure out the stuff that they suck at. It'll actually eliminate 60 to 80% of everything that they're looking at.
Yeah, I actually love that, because I tell people all the time, they're like, I don't know what I want to do. And I'm like, okay, great. The best place to start is exactly with what you don't want to do, because that eliminates so much stuff. But it's like, it feels obvious, but it's not. When you start writing that stuff down on paper, like I did this years ago, I was trying to kind of at a crossroads, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I just started writing down the things I knew I didn't want to do. I was like, I don't want to work on weekends. I don't want to travel more than 30% of the time. I don't want to make under $150,000 a year base. I don't want, and I just started going through that. And when I started going through that, I'm like, well, yeah, I was looking at these 6 other things, and really only 2 of them even come close to matching up. And it just made it so much simpler. So I love that approach. It's like, if you don't know what you want to do, start with what you absolutely know you don't want to do, and it'll narrow that focus really well.
Yeah. So to give you an example, if your kid, like me, sucked at, English. I mean, I even had a teacher in high school said, you're never going to graduate from college because you're not going to pass English. Newsflash, law school, even though you think law and order is cool, probably not a good way to go. Right?
A lot of words in there. A lot of words in law school.
What's that?
I said a lot of big words in law school.
Yeah, and a lot of reading. Ugh, just makes my stomach turn. You know, school's not your thing, but you really love your psychology class. You think you want to be a psychologist. Okay, are you doing the math that's 7 to 9 years post high school, more school? The very thing that you hate, you're not wired for. You're like, right. Oh, please, can I have more? No, right? So you know, in that sense. So here's where I'm driving this back to is the purpose piece. Mm-hmm. The purpose is, you know, we've told kids, we tell people, we hear in culture, like, do what you love. Okay. First of all, that in and of itself is horrible advice. I love basketball.
I agree.
I'm 6 feet. I'm a white guy. I can't shoot a basketball. I mean, so bad, my coach called timeout and basically threatened to bench me if I shot the basketball again. Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know that somebody out there's like, well, you know, Spud Webb, he was pretty small, right? But, you know, the problem is that we have this bias that we think like, okay, well, if Spud can do it, I can do it.
Right.
Really, really, really bad analogy. Spud can, you know, could hop like 20, 30 inches off the ground. I'm probably good for about 4. Okay.
Spud Webb, Muggsy Bogues. It's like, there's a reason we remember their names. They were the only 2 guys probably under 5'8" ever to play in the NBA. So it's like, it's already rare enough to get to the NBA, but then to think you're going to do it being that short, it's probably not the gamble you want to make for your life.
And speaking of for business owners and entrepreneurs, that's a problem for them too, right? Because a concept I've come to appreciate is founders and entrepreneurs and business owners, we have this bias. People say we're risk takers. I don't think we're risk takers. I think we are opportunity seekers, and we overestimate our ability to control or mitigate the risk. I mean, my college planning business, Stephen, I don't even know how I made it the first 3 years. I mean, actually, I do, because I was using what I like to refer to affectionately as account-based, account balance financing. I open up my app. Oh yeah, I've got money in the account. I've got a balance big enough to do what I want to buy. Right, I'm going to go buy it. Right. Of course, that turns out bad if you have credit cards and you go, oh, I've got credit limit. I can buy that, and then we forget we got to pay it off. But where I'm going is, you know, you should do something you love, number one. But number two, what is it that you're good at? Because I personally believe God has created us to do probably no more than 3 to 5 things exceptionally well. Not things that you need a college degree for to validate you're good at, like they're good. Quick and dirty, easy exercise. Send out an email to 15 to 20 of the people that are closest to you who will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And just ask them this one simple question. When you think about me, what are the skills, abilities, or adjectives that it would be a crime if my picture was not next to them in Wikipedia? And they'll tell you, and that'll help you disseminate between what you know you suck, don't want to do versus the light that they see you in. That'll help you start to do that. So you know what you love, you know what you're at, and then what does the world need?
Right. Yeah, right? You're pretty much talking about the ikigai. And for those that don't know, it's a Japanese concept of these concentric overlapping circles. It's like, what does the world need? What are you good at? What do you love? And I'm forgetting the fourth one, but basically at the center of all of that Venn diagram is your ikigai. So it's like your purpose, what you can get paid for, all this. This is the thing I love about the ikigai that not a lot of people talk about. They estimate that around the world, about 3% of people are currently doing their ikigai. And the reason I think that's so great... I
think that's high.
And it could be. I think that's a little optimistic. But the reason I think that's so great is because 97% of people are not miserable, right? In general, life's been better globally than it ever has been. And happiness is, and life satisfaction is generally pretty high when you look at it. So, it's one of those things that, well, if only 3% of people, maybe on the upside, are living their ikigai and have it all perfectly figured out, that tells me that you don't need to be working at the thing that you're passionate about or the thing you love to have a fulfilling life.
It's absolutely true. And, for business owners and founders, the fourth factor you just add to that is, how can I make money? And
right.
Here's what's interesting. We bet on ourselves to mitigate the risk, but we don't bet on ourselves in terms of the value that we deliver. That's hard for us to see. And that's one of the values of somebody communicating back to us where they see us as brilliant, because sometimes we're so, it's the four layers of consciousness. I'm unconsciously incompetent. Then I'm consciously competent, meaning when I put transmission fluid in the radiator of my wife's Mazda about 3 months after we got married, I quickly became consciously aware that I was incompetent at fixing cars. So I hire somebody to do that now, right?
Right.
And that's actually okay.
Yeah.
That's a win in and of itself. Then the next step is we become consciously competent, meaning we're having to think about what we're doing. But unconscious competence, that's where our 3 to 5 brilliances sit. And so sometimes we can't see those because we're too close to them. And that reflection of people that tell us what we need to hear is important. Then it's also equally important when we go to the market is to understand, if you'll quit serving everybody being a wandering generality and you'll be a meaningful specific. Like, I could serve tons of folks.
Right.
Work with founders. Why? Because our value proposition is not that the people we serve aren't smart, not that they couldn't do it themselves. It's that we believe wealth is the discretion of time, because it lets you have the four wealths that you talk about, because you can do what you want, when you want, with who you want, how you want, right?
That's it. That's what it's all about.
If you're gonna do everything, then you're actually never going to do anything that is deep, rich, meaningful, and gives you joy, because you're never going to arrive. And so we got to get in those 3 to 5 unique capabilities, right? Yeah. We got to identify the stuff we suck at. Allow somebody the joy to serve you there. Life will be better. I mean,
well, let me ask you something real quick, because let's talk about something that a lot of people who are trying to build wealth, maybe you got money problems. Okay. I would say, okay, if you do need to focus on your financial wealth because you're not in a good place with that, I would say you need to do this exercise for the exact same reason, but a slightly different intention, because you need to identify the 3 to 5 things that you are really good at. And you need to know that with certainty, because I think the sexy thing nowadays is for people to go, okay, I need to earn more money. Let me start a side hustle. And what I tell people is, I'm not against side hustles, but if you're going to do one, you need to do one of 2 things first. Number one, you need to rule out any opportunity to get an immediate pay bump doing what you're already doing. Like, a lot of times, I had a friend that was in project management, and he was calling me about a side hustle. And I said, well, let me ask you something. What would it take for you to get promoted? And he was like, well, I'd have to do this certification. I said, how long would that take?
He'd have to ask. And he'd have to ask a question.
Yeah, right. He was like, well, it'd take me 20 hours to get that certification, and it cost me $500. I said, there is no, I said, and how much would you make on that? An extra $10,000 a year. I said, there is no side hustle ever that you can do in 20 hours that will net you $10,000 extra dollars a year. So it's like, that's the first thing you got to do, is make sure that there's not immediate opportunity to get promoted or jump ship to another place and get paid more. The second thing that you do is, if you are going to start a side hustle, instead of going from, well, I enjoy making decorative pillows, so I'm going to go start a decorative pillow company, even though, I'm in construction or something totally random that's not correlated, you need to ask yourself, well, is there something that's industry adjacent to what I'm already doing? Like, okay, I'm in sales. Could I teach sales? to people. And it's like, at least it's industry adjacent, to what it is you're doing, so you can capitalize on your primary thing. So I love that exercise that you're talking about for two different reasons. Number one, it's like, yeah, it'll make you aware of purpose and the things that, are really going to fill up your cup. But then the other side is, if you are trying to make money, hey, guess what? Figure these things out and then double down on them. So I think it's great advice.
Well, I think financial advisors are horrible for this. And I'm going to use financial advisors in a
I
broad
agree.
term, right? I mean, I wish folks on LinkedIn and everywhere else would quit fighting over what the perfect fee model is, and they'd fight for what it is that they're actually good at, right? Because they're so busy, like, is it AUM? Is it a flat fee? Is it, whatever? And I don't have any conflicts of interest, which is all garbage. There are conflicts of interest in every scenario. The question,
Right.
The bigger question is, can you identify them? Like, do you know they're there, or are they blind spots for you, right? And so, like in my scenario, I hate managing money, man. So we pay somebody to do it. Why? Because there's somebody who absolutely, it's
not your center
like
of genius.
A never-ending aphrodisiac to look at charts and do figure that stuff out, right? Like, I started out with a health and life license, and I was going to go get a PNC license, and I'm 2 days into the course, Stephen, and I'm like, I got ADHD to start with, sitting in a for 4 days straight's like, asking inside one draw. It just doesn't happen, right? And
I'm laughing because I had the same story. I was 2 of the 4 CPA tests in, only to find out that this was back in 2017. It's probably changed a little bit now, but only to find out that I couldn't talk about crypto if I got licensed. And I'm like, well, this is one of the top things. I love talking about technology. People want to know about investing in crypto. So if I become a licensed professional, I can't talk about it. Again, things are changing a little bit now, but it was like, I was getting into it going, well, this is going to prohibit me from the thing I want to be doing. So I didn't go down that route. So, yeah.
Well, so and it's those prohibitions, but it's also like, will you really be honest with yourself about, are you doing something again because it's for the wrong reason? We're chasing a dollar, whatever. And I literally thank goodness I just had this epiphany. And at lunch after, at the second day, I went up and I told the guys, I go, hey, I got to tell you, you guys are exceptional teachers. Like, you really are. This is the most boring, mundane, and you're keeping me, I think, about as interested as I can be. And I'm about to fall asleep and my mind's wandering to all the other things. I just want you to know I'm going to tap out because I need to quit now, because I will never serve somebody well here. Right now,
man, I think if more people did that with experiences in their life, whether it's the person they're dating, whether it's the job that they have, we would just be so much better off. Because I think, they say, like, don't be a quitter. I totally disagree with that. There's a lot of things people need to quit, and you identify what those things are, doing exactly the advice that you just gave, is figuring out, what really makes you tick, what really lights you up and gets you passionate about. It's not hard to figure those things out. Real quick, just because we're up on time, one thing that I know we talked about a little bit, and I think this would be helpful for people to know, is you have a little bit of a cash flow system, that, we were going back and forth on. I'd love to hear just a little bit of the basics on that, because the thing that I like talking about with cash flow with people, that really, and having a system around that, that's so powerful, is, number one, does it not, it increases your financial wealth when you have a system, but then it also increases your time wealth. And a lot of people don't think of it that way, but when you don't have a system, or if your system is doing it manually, right, it's eating up a lot of time and probably a lot of emotional level stuff too, because money is emotional. So the more time you are manually dealing with it, there's a health wealth component to that too. So just, for the next 5 minutes, let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm really interested to kind of hear about your approach to some of the things that you do with your clients.
Well, one of the things that I think you have to do is, you don't do 100% of what the experts say, right? Because a lot of the experts aren't doing what they say.
Very true.
But if you look at the stars like a Warren Buffett, who's been successful, maybe you don't want to buy equities, those types of things, but what are the commonalities? He he does everything possible not to make emotional decisions around money, right?
Right.
He does everything possible to avoid risk. He does everything possible to give himself time freedom and space to think about the decisions he's making, which means he's not doing what? He's not managing all of his personal finances. And so here's the thing is that, your startup business owner, they're living this lie. Well, that's easy for you to say. When I get there to $1 million, or when I get there, I'll take vacation or I'll do this. No. It's just like tithing. You won't start tithing more just because you have more. You'll start tithing because it's a priority. It's a purpose for you.
And it becomes a discipline and a habit.
Will happen with that. Just like our time for our schedule. You talk about it all the time. Like you schedule Sunday is off, period.
Totally
so
off.
Everything else by Parkinson's law must fit in from the law of constraint.
Yep.
Right? So I love actually Ben Hardy's book. He did some great work with Dan Sullivan, but actually my favorite book of his is actually his own book. It's called Willpower Doesn't Work. It's a culmination of Atomic Habits and a couple of other books that he kind of consolidates. It's a little carried away with the stories, but really resonated with me back during COVID, especially around finances. The environment works 24/7, 365. You will not ever win against the environment.
Sure.
So if you know that's true, then you better figure out how do you set your environment up, given what you will do, which again requires honesty, right? So that you can protect yourself from yourself to a degree in how you set up your environment. Okay. So for years, I've hated systems. They constrain my freedom. They constrain my creativity until I realized actually it was paradoxical. The systems, specifically financial systems, are what give you the freedom to do more you want to do. And so we created this thing I call simple automated cash flow. And it's a process that allows anybody, a business owner, an individual, to effectively manage their finances and control their finances in a way that transforms their life. Why? Because they spend 15 minutes or less once it's built and they're in the flow, right, to manage their finances. And I built it because I got tired of fighting with my wife over money. Like
it's a good point.
Yeah, and then she'd want to justify it, and I was thinking in my head, like I don't care. Like I don't want to fight over it. Like I just want to be able to spend time, and I want to make sure that we're using the dollars to do the things that we care about. So simple automated cash flow is kind of inspired by like Mike Michalowicz's Profit First, which I like, but is extremely complex. We don't need 40 accounts to manage personal finances. Also Dave Ramsey, to give credit, the envelope system, but I mean, Stephen, if you go to a high school football game these days and pull out your envelope and try to give them cash, I mean, you might get arrested.
It's true.
Because you're trying to give somebody COVID on a dollar bill or something. I mean, like we're allergic, right, to dollars, right? But simple automated cash flow is basically setting up 3 accounts, an inflow, an outflow, and a private reserve. So that we can simplify and automate our finances. Now, the thing that I would say about this is, people would say, well, 3 accounts, that seems overly complex, but it's not, because each account,
compared to most people I talk to, it's actually pretty simplistic. But so I like that.
Each account has a specific purpose. So
I think we get, just for the sake of time and everything, I think people will get the inflow and outflow. Talk about what the private reserve is, because I think that's a lot of the things that people really need to make sure that they understand. That's a really important piece.
Yeah. So to just do the obvious, the inflow is where all of your money lands. And if you're a business owner and you're not paying yourself consistently, ask yourself this one question. If you paid your vendor or your landlord where you have an office the way you pay yourself, how long would you have an office? Probably not very often, right?
Right.
The outflow is the account that we live out of, but that
Yes.
private reserve is where we automate and stack dollars. So, um, you know, we hide the dollars effectively from ourselves and we automate the transfer. So at the beginning of the month, there's enough to cover our lifestyle, and we automatically transfer and stack in that private reserve the rest of those dollars. And what we really love about this is we need to have short and long-term wins, because the real issue around this is, Stephen, people get shamed over money
Yep.
because folks in my industry, well, you should or try all over yourself, but that's not actually going to get you what you want. So in that private reserve, we create a basic budget, which I love your spreadsheet, and obviously a few other folks do too, because they're trying to rip it off and duplicate it, right?
Yeah, a lot of people, a lot of big influencers seem to be loving it.
Yeah. So hey, that's the clue that you're a genius in some aspects. But we then round the dollars off, and we purposely have a pad, because what we're seeking to do is we're seeking, when we do that audit and we have an awareness around where our money's going without being emotionally tied to is it good or bad, we want some leftover so that we can manually transfer it. So we look at our private reserve account intentionally, actually once a month, and we learn two things. We learn it's growing every month. Man, that feels good. And if we have some extra, as we would say, in that outflow, and we manually transfer it, right, then we feel like we've won the money game. And you don't have to win 12 months a year. You just need to win more than you lose, obviously.
That's right.
Okay. But the third aspect that I think has been magical, we kind of stumbled upon, is we would take that extra, if you will, and we would split it into what we call short-term and long-term fun. And so let's say you had an extra $500. Let's say it was just $100, right? Just so you're getting that habit. It's 100 extra bucks. So you put $50 over there and you do it for a couple months. You go ask that question to get the job, or your kid does something awesome and you want to celebrate. And all you do is you just go get ice cream and you're like, hey, everybody can get whatever dessert that they want. And that creates an exceptional experience. You know what our brain says? That I want more of that. And now we quit spending money on pizza 10 times a week because we're tired, because now we have some positive emotional support that says, no, it's worth the effort to say no here so I can go do this experience that gives us joy and happiness.
There's got to be a payoff. I love that.
Once that happens, man, like, you don't got to convince anybody to implement the system. Like, they want to do it, and that's the key.
And the other side of this, right, is the fact that you're not talking about people who have $4,000 a month in expenses, right? You're saying that you can manage your finances and systems within 15 to 20 minutes a month, which is exactly the same thing that I tell people. I'm like, look, I manage all my money in 30 minutes a month, and that a lot of that time is spent just communicating to my wife. You know, I probably only need 15 minutes, but a lot of that is just conversation with her because she is not the money person. So I love the system. Look, we may have to do another conversation just talking about that and what it looks like, the details and the benefits more, because I'm right there in line with you. A lot of people don't realize, they are like, well, I just don't know about systems. And then I tell them, I'm like, well, it doesn't matter if you don't know about them. You already have systems, whether you realize what they are or not. The question is, are they producing the output that you want? So, Andrew, this has been great, man. We'll definitely, like I said, have to do a part 2. I think there's so much more we could get into. What's a great place for people to be able to find you?
I'm predominantly on LinkedIn. I can't be in 50 places at one time, and I'm not even great, candidly, at LinkedIn, at least in consistently posting. But they can find me there, or they can email me, Andrew at Educated Freedom. And we're finishing up an assessment that I'll let you put in the show notes.
Oh, that'd be great.
Go take an assessment of a check-in. And then we also have just finished actually formalizing this simple automated cash flow into a step-by-step lead magnet. And so we'll make sure you have a link to that in the show notes as well.
Can't wait to see that.
If we can help somebody, you know, It's not about getting more clients, although that certainly doesn't ever hurt our feelings, right? But we want to help more people be wiser, smarter, and better stewards of their financial resources, because when they are, they get to do all the other things that really matter.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, my friend, for jumping on with me and talking about this. This has been fun, and we'll absolutely do it again.